Hello, everybody. I'm Jess Fuller. I am the Director of Project Development and Operations at Reschool. And this is the recorded version of getting started with Design Lab. So Reschool, for those of you that don't know, is a Colorado-based nonprofit. And we've been working over the last decade to ensure equitable, accessible education systems for all young people. And all that work is based in us co-designing with families, education providers, and young people. And over the last several years, people have asked Reschool to talk a little bit more about how we work, how this co-design process works. And so we created what is called Design Lab, and it really dives into how we do our work. And the hope with Design Lab is that folks can take what we've provided and adapt it to do this kind of co-design work with families, young people, and ed providers in their own context. We'll get into that a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just want to show some appreciation too for you listening in. All right, let me get us in present mode here. Okay. All right. So Design Lab's why y'all are here. At some level, I am assuming that you are interested in seeing how this tool might support the work that you're doing. We hold live sessions of this too, but what we've learned is this and another session that I will talk about in a moment has been really helpful for people to listen back to have without all of the kind of group activities and things like that. So we wanted to give you all a few options for engaging in this. Even though this is the recorded version, we're still going to do the grounding exercise. So wherever you are, I even if you're, walking around listening to this recording, if just for this grounding exercise, you can find yourself a seat in a quiet spot. We're going to start with just a little breathing activity that I will guide us through. So kind of find a comfortable seat, plant your feet on the ground, and close your eyes if that feels safe. If it doesn't, kind of soften your gaze and find a spot on the wall or the floor or table, something that's just static and not moving. And take a deep cleansing breath in and out. Start to scan your body as you're breathing, asking yourself what you notice. You can kind of start at the top of your head and move through your body. Take another deep breath in, feeling your rib cage expand all around and out. Focus in on your heart space as you take your next deep breath in. How's it feeling in that space in your body? And out. And just take another couple deep breaths in and out at your own pace. Noticing not only what's going on in your body, but also where your mind's at. If it's focused on your breath, or if it's kind of wandering into a couple different directions. None of that's bad. Just notice it. Come back to your breath once you've had those thoughts. Go ahead and take one more deep breath in and out. Start to open your eyes, bring your gaze back to the screen. Thank you for engaging in that. Something I didn't mention that I meant to at the beginning of this recording is that we have a lot of journaling opportunities in here, and really the session is more rich if you are engaging in these reflection pieces. So the beautiful thing about a recording is that you can pause me at any time. So pause to go and grab something to write with and something to write on. And we're going to go into our first journaling exercise where you're just going to write for yourself what you noticed when you were going through that grounding exercise and how you're doing today. And that's really for you. So go ahead and pause me and then come back when you're done with that. Take about 5 minutes. Okay. So here is what we've got for today's session. I talked a little bit about Design Lab in the opening. It is a set of tools and practices to co-design education services, programs, and systems with your community. We go in another session, we go really deep into what all is in Design Lab, how you can access it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. That Exploring Design Lab session is kind of a precursor to this one. And so if you haven't listened to it, you can access that on YouTube, and I'll show you that in a moment. This session is really going to focus on some tips for getting started. So, this is for folks that know what Design Lab is, you're interested, you want to use it, and you're kind of like, where do I go from here? We're going to be going over some key tips for getting started. And the hope here is that you really leave with some practical, real, tangible next steps for how you want to continue your community anchored work. Hopefully Design Lab is a helpful tool in doing that. I do want to say that Design Lab is a culmination of a decade of human-centered design work at Reschool, and that we do not do this in isolation. If you go to our website on Design Lab, you will see a long list of people that both have informed Design Lab and that have tools that are complementary to it. What I would encourage is that you think of Design Lab as a canvas that has some foundational tools for you. And then, because likely you're in this human-centered design work also, you know about a lot of other tools or have used a lot of other tools that have been helpful to you, that you kind of bring in those tools with Design Lab and that complement each other, and you layer and add to Design Lab in whatever way is helpful for you. This can be a really short journaling activity, just a few minutes for you, but I think it is really useful just to take a minute to ask yourself, what brought you here today? Why did you decide to listen to my voice for the next hour and about this tool? What piqued your curiosity? What was the recommendation from somebody that asked you to listen to this recording? So go ahead and pause me, take a moment to write to yourself. Okay. We do have that, I would say that this is one of Design Lab's introductory resources. We have some more that I want to highlight. I talked a little earlier about a 1-hour recording we have on YouTube called Exploring Design Lab. The link is here. You can also go on to the Reschool account page on YouTube and access that Exploring Design Lab recording. It is, I'm recording this particular recording May 20, what is today? May 22nd, 2023. Today there is only an English version of Exploring Design Lab up. There will be a Spanish version up soon. Same with this recording. In short order, there will be an English and Spanish version. We also have the Design Lab page on our website that talks a whole lot about what Design Lab is, who it's for. Exploring Design Lab goes deep into what is inside Design Lab, what are the tools, what are the resources. And we also created some audio vignettes that are embedded within Design Lab, because what we learned when we iterated on Design Lab and when we had people pilot it and test it out is that it's really helpful to have some examples to go along with the concepts that come along in Design Lab. So that's why those are there. Please use those as they're helpful for you. And hopefully those resources will enrich in this recording as well. Okay, so this visual here is core to Design Lab. It is core to how we think about systems change and systems transformation at Reschool. It is called our Design Lab model, our triple loop model. And I'm just going to kind of walk us through a little bit of, I mean, you can talk about this for days, I feel like, but I'm going to walk through what this triple loop model is and different ways that you might look at it. You'll notice here that there's an awareness side and an action side to this triple loop. When we engaged in that breathing exercise at the beginning of this recording, what we were really tapping into was this awareness side. So I'm going to start there. We believe that, in order to be aware of our systems, our communities, our team, we have to first become aware of ourselves. And a really simple way to do that is to do a breathing exercise like we did today. When we are first aware of ourselves, we can understand a little better why we're coming into different community situations the way we are, different team situations, and then how that community and that team is pushing on or being in the system, the education system, how the system or teams are also impacting ourselves. On this right side, this action side, this really gets after the process and how we do our work. So listening is at the very core of community anchored work, human-centered design work, listening to community, listening to their experiences. That when you're using Design Lab will then take you into a co-design process with community. What did you hear? What does that mean? What should we try? And once you do that, you're always reflecting on what did we learn? What should we continue to iterate on this concept? Should we not? And then the cycle kind of starts over again. Once you've reflected, you might decide you need to go back and do some more listening, that there's some more prototyping to do to kind of expand the concept to learn more. And these two loops, these two sides of the triple loop also interact with each other. So I want to point out a few ways in which that works. When you're listening to community, it's going to change you. If you're there authentically listening, if you trust community and what they're saying, it will fundamentally change you. It'll change the team or the group that you're in, that is working together. And it can also change the system. You'll notice this tension line down here in the middle. It's because all of these loops sit in tension with each other. A lot of times what you're hearing from community is in tension with how the system is operating. It might be in tension from how your team is operating, and adjustments might need to be made. One more thing that I'll point out about this loop, and my experience is people are thinking about this loop later. They make different connections after this. So this is really just kind of hopefully setting some fertile ground for you to think more about how this model might resonate with you. But the last thing that I'll point out here is that we believe that by engaging in a community anchored process like Design Lab, you'll get to a place with concepts that have been co-designed with families that will make systemic impact. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this session. We also have a video explanation on our Design Lab website of the triple loop. It's similar to what I just walked through, but that's a resource for you as well. Okay, we're going to get into our first tip. There's 3 that we're going to walk through. This first one is about centering the intellect and experiences of under and non-consumers. Reschool started out in 2013. And when we did, we leaned on Clay Christensen's and the Christensen Institute's idea of disruptive innovation. And part of that is about really partnering with and learning from under and non-consumers. And for us, as we were focused on the education system, some examples of who that might be are people who choose to homeschool their kids. Those are non-consumers of the education system. And an example of under consumers are folks that have kids that are too young to engage in the system yet. So maybe they're in childcare, in early education, and they haven't quite gotten to the point they're planning on engaging in maybe the public school system, but they aren't yet. And then a group that we continue to partner with today are those that are under consumers because they've been systemically marginalized. So our marginalized communities, they don't have access to all that the system offers, and that's what makes marginalized communities under consumers. What we learned early on is, and from our experiences collectively as a team at Reschool working inside the system, is that it's really hard for the system to innovate itself. It was kind of set up and designed to run for who it was designed for. And there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape and things that make it you know, that there's resource constraints, time constraints, money constraints to be able to work within the system and transform it. And so that's why we decided at Reschool that if the system needs to be transformed to be equitable and accessible, we've got to step outside of that system. And we need to engage people differently. We need to specifically engage folks that the system has not worked for, or that people have completely opted to be outside of the system. And so that's our first tip in engaging in Design Lab, is that you figure out who are the under and non-consumers in your sphere, in the work that you're doing, and let's center their intellect and experiences, or your intellect and experiences, if that's you. We have some links that we want to share that are associated to this slide. I mentioned Clay Christensen and the Christensen Institute, Disruptive Innovation Theory, and the Innovator's Dilemma. I'll drop links in. There will be links in the comments as you're watching this video, so that you can read more about that if you're interested. We also have a link about it's a definition that we did not make up, but that we utilize around, like, how are we defining marginalized communities? And so that will also be in the notes for you to access. Here's another journal opportunity. We want you to just take a moment based on what we just talked about and ask yourself what you're curious about in your work or in your community that you want to understand better. And then who are the under non-consumers in your context, in your community? So go ahead and pause the recording. Take, 5 minutes to journal about this. If we were in a live session, we would do breakouts and we would kind of share with each other. And so if you've got someone that you can share this with asynchronously after you listen to this recording, we'll continue to build on your journaling. All right, let's go ahead and dive into tip 2. And this is to start small. We learned from a design studio, a human-centered design studio out in Chicago that you might have heard of, called Greater Good. We learned this from them early on at Reschool. The reason, the root of this tip is that if you start small and you start inexpensive with a concept that's been co-designed with community, you can see early on if it has merit or value. What happens too often in our systems and our education system is that somebody thinks they've got the silver bullet, the answer for better, more equitable, accessible systems, and they spend a ton of time and money on it, and it falls flat. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be. When you start small, there's so many concepts that emerge from Reschool's work and listening with community and families that we first piloted on pieces of construction paper, literally, and with just a few families. I think this is a hard one because the needs are vast and they're big and they're deep. The things that need to change in our education system in order for it to be accessible and equitable are urgent. And so it's hard not to want to move fast, make an idea broadly available, go to scale with it. But the reason we actually believe that you'll save time and money and a lot of heartache if you start small, for a few reasons. Number one, if you start small, it allows for you to design for access early when the stakes are low. So if you've got, families and education providers or whoever it is that is piloting a new concept, oftentimes they know that they are a part of a pilot. There's a lot more grace. They understand what kind of they are, what they've signed up for. And so if things go wrong, that's sort of, that's part of what happens in a pilot sometimes. The other is that things emerge whether you're working with thousands of families or 7 families, the access issues or design issues or hiccups, those are going to emerge with a small group of people. And you can work out the kinks of those issues early with a small group of people when the stakes are low, before it becomes available to a ton of people. And a lot of people are having issues with whatever the concept is. There's just a lot less people impacted when you start small. The other thing about starting small is that it is a lot easier to get the okay for resources or to spend time on something because it's not costing much money. A lot of times, if you are doing this work and you are not the person in the position of power that okays things like this, and you have to ask for permission to try a new concept, chances are it's going to be a lot easier to get the okay and the green light if it's a small pilot versus, for example, piloting something across a district or full neighborhoods or something like that. The other bit I'll just say on this slide is that it takes time to build relationships, and context and understanding. And when you're building relationships with families, with community members, with education providers, whoever it is, it's a lot easier to do that with a small group of people than if you're trying to build relationship and authentically listen to a whole bunch of folks. You may have seen this before. This is the Waters of Systems Change graphic, and it illuminates kind of the systemic forces that are at play and the things that need to shift, the conditions that need to shift if we're going to transform our systems. These are the things that either shift for transformation or they're holding the problem in place in systems. And we could talk about a whole lot of things here, but the reason I bring this up is that when you start small, it's just to underscore a point I made on the previous slide. When you start small, these things are a lot easier to maneuver around. So as I said earlier, if you need to get the okay from folks in the position of power to do this, it's a lot easier if you're starting small, easier to build relationships. You don't need to have as robust practices in place. You don't need as many resources. So it just frees you up to innovate and try and actually get into these ideas that have emerged from community conversations. This gets us into our next journaling activity. Got a few questions here for you to marinate on, to think about. And it really builds on the journaling that you've done so far in this session. So, who holds decision-making power in your context? Do you have some time and financial resources to put towards trying ideas? And who holds the relationships? If it's not you, do you have partners that hold relationships with the people that you're wanting to learn from? we really want to be thoughtful about the time that we're asking from folks in our community, especially families, education providers, people who are most viscerally experiencing change in our systems, the impacts, the everything. And so we want to ask ourselves early on whether we have the time and the financial resources to follow up with what emerges from those conversations. We really don't know what ideas are gonna come. And as I said, we can think creatively always about doing things in a way that don't cost very much money and take very much time. I'll share a quick example here that, when Reschool first partnered with families that were associated to Boulder Housing Partners, which is an affordable housing space in Colorado, we partnered with 7 families. We had just over $3,000, and 2 of our staff spent a little bit of their time over the course of a couple of weeks to engage in this human-centered design process in Design Lab, listening to families, walking alongside them and understanding and listening to their experiences, and co-designing ideas with them. And so I always give that example because it's important to know that it really is it's not a lot of time and financial resources, but you do need some, and that's something we want to be clear about. The other thing before you go into your journaling session that I just want to say is that, depending on where you're at in the system, you might be the one that has a ton of resources or has the power, but you don't have relationship with community. And that doesn't mean you can't engage in Design Lab. Absolutely not. There's been times where Reschool hasn't had the relationship with the families that we want to learn from. In that case, you ask yourself, well, who does that we know? And how might we be able to partner with them in authentic ways that also honors their time that they're spending? Because at the end of the day, we want families to be able to work with folks that they have built relationship and trust with. So with that, go ahead and pause me and reflect on these questions. I think a question that we get a whole lot is just around it's around, okay, if you start small and if these needs are so urgent, how then are we going to create systemic change? And that's where I bring up this triple loop model again. And I just, the thing is, I'm going to say something that I said a little bit earlier, and that is that when you start small, you work out the kinks, you work out the access issues, and you keep working through this side of the triple loop. I mean, all of it's always in action, but when you continue to evolve on a concept and then you figure out how to make it available more broadly to people, and you're learning bit by bit how to work through the next level of access issues as it becomes more and more available. Eventually, you're going to get to a point where there's a systems play. And I can give an example of that. I shared earlier that we worked with families, 7 families at Boulder Housing Partners. They had $3,500 among them for what we call learning dollars, which allows families to, it's flexible dollars that they can direct towards their kids' learning. They get to make, they're making the choice as to where to direct those funds for their kids' learning. That's where we started with the concept of learning dollars, because we knew from talking to families that that out of school space is expensive, and what makes it partly inaccessible is how expensive it is, and that families don't have flexible funds to put towards it based on their kids' desires, interests, and needs. And so we started there. We continued to iterate on that concept, and we got to a point in 2021 where we were part of a coalition that was, you might have heard of the LEAP initiative. It would have given learning dollars to families from low-income households across Colorado, and it would have released $135 million about. That ballot initiative didn't pass, but the concept was there, and soon after that, Denver, Colorado passed a measure called MySpark, which is a $5 million pilot that will distribute learning dollars to families from low-income households across the city. Now, that's an example of something big and systemic happening from this process. I would argue that there's cost savings over time in doing it this way, because since we had worked through a lot of the access issues, we were able to stand in a really important gap as the concept of learning dollars broadens and reaches more people, and be able to say, hey, be careful what technology platform you choose to use. It's this is what we've learned from using different technology platforms, or this is what we've learned from distributing dollars to families. That we know all of that. We've learned all of it on the front end, and doing it with smaller groups of people, so that when it's time to more broadly distribute, we're not making those mistakes at a broad scale, or those learnings aren't happening when this is available at a broad scale. Let's see here. There's examples, right? That's not usually how it works. Usually it feels like legislation drops and everyone's scrambling just to set the thing up, to figure out how to implement it. And then all these accessibility considerations kind of fall to the wayside because everyone's hair's on fire just trying to make it happen. And then a whole bunch of people are left out of the process because the design, the implementation is not in consideration of what lots of folks need in order to access whatever the resource is. And then the legislation, the hope for the legislation, the change that we hoped it would bring about doesn't end up happening because it's not reaching the folks that need it most. I'm going to pause for just a second because I just got worried that I didn't actually hit record. I wanted to stop sharing my screen to make sure that I was. Okay, I am. That would have been bad, huh? I'll go back to my screen here. One moment. Sorry about that little pause in the presentation. Just needed to reassure myself. Okay. All right, let's get back into it. Okay. I could talk about that all day. It's really important. Let's go ahead and round us out with the third tip, which is not to compete with the system. When we first started Reschool, we wouldn't have had this as a tip. When we started, we thought that the original idea of Reschool was that we were going to create a parallel education system, so that families could choose, whether they wanted to go into the traditional education system or this reschooled system. We never wanted to take money from the traditional system. That was an important step for us to take in our evolution, because what it allowed us to do is really untether ourselves from the current rules and regulations and give us this kind of green fielding space where we could co-design with families and truly innovate. We talked earlier about how hard that is when you're in the system. And then as we did the work, actually, and we partnered with families and we learned about their experiences, we heard from families that going to school and engaging in this traditional system is very important to them for various reasons, very important to families. And they weren't willing to kind of make a choice between two systems. And so what that led us to is this is an evolved idea of Reschool that we've been iterating on for several years now, the last 5, I'd say. And that is that learning happens everywhere, that the experience in however you decide to do school, whether that's in a traditional education system, by homeschooling. Obviously, the traditional system has lots of options with private school and neighborhood schools, charter schools, and such. But that is part of your learning experience as a human, as a young person, and that learning happens everywhere. There's an entire out of school landscape where there's a lot of important learning happening, and also where it's very inequitable and inaccessible for lots of families and young people. That is a key part of building networks and building learning experiences, that folks are learning in their communities and at home and with their parents. And so we really started to focus on how do we ensure access to learning across these fields that is really centered on each family's values, desires, interests, goals, needs. So that's an important thing to note here, because we've been led by what we learn from families, from those under and non-consumers, that completely evolved Reschool as an organization and took us in a different direction. We changed our mission, our vision, our focus based on what we were hearing from families. And I think that, we talk more about this in Exploring Design Lab. There are some commitments around Design Lab, one of which is to explore your internal and external structures and practices. And at Reschool, we've needed to provide enough flexibility and reflection that we can evolve as needed with what we're hearing from families. And so we're constantly, as an organization, in that triple loop model as well. And I just think it's a kind of beautiful example that a whole organization will iterate itself based on what it's hearing from families, and won't stay stagnant. And so that's something that always gets me excited. This idea of not competing in the system really was something that we bumped into accidentally. We started doing a lot of our work during the summertime and at Reschool. And what we realized about that time is that families were a little more flexible than they are during the traditional school year. They're a little bit more willing to try new things. We could talk to education providers, different ones, more in the summer, as opposed to during the school year. And we really, that it just ended up being this natural space, that a time of year that kind of was beautiful for innovation and for trying new things. And so this is a tip that we learned over time, that if you're going to be doing this work, this community anchored, this human-centered design work that was just a really beautiful time to not have to compete with the system, to not bump it up against different rules and regulations. And so that was an important learning. Our last journal opportunity, I think it is for you to ask yourself what it looks like not to compete with the system in your own context, with what you have fleshed out so far today in your journaling exercises. Take 5 minutes to do that. I'll say I feel like this can be a little bit difficult and funky to work through depending on where you sit in the system. So do reach out to your colleagues and talk to them about it and kind of see what emerges. And we're always willing and happy to have those conversations at Reschool too. It's why we love to do these sessions live, so that we can sort of learn from each other. All right. So potential next steps, because, this was, great to learn a few things about Design Lab, some tips for getting started, but then what, right? There's some listening practices in Design Lab, and I love them because I think that we assume a lot of times that we listen all the time and, like we don't really think about it, but these listening practices slow you down a bit and make you think, encourage you to think about how you're coming in to a conversation, how that might impact the conversation, to reflect on conversations once you've had them. Because back to that triple loop model, those conversations, those interactions are then going to reverberate out and impact everything else. I mentioned briefly in that last tip that there are 10 commitments in Design Lab that really set kind of the guardrails for working within. And we encourage you to listen to the audio vignettes on those 10 commitments. Before you engage community in listening, really and truly, it's very important to make sure that whoever the decision maker is on board, and that there are some resources to engage in this process. And then to start thinking about how you or partners will connect with community. I have my information up here in case you want to reach out. We at Reschool, we do several different coaching and advising and workshops, and we really tailor make that to whatever your needs are. And so this form starts to, we get information to kind of get some grounding on what you're looking for. And sometimes what we learn is like, oh, where you're at, listening to this recording could be helpful, or we can explore some deeper ways to partner. So we're always interested in that. I'll stop my share and just want to thank you all for spending the last bit of time. I hope this was helpful. I hope that it gives you some tips and direction for how to start playing with Design Lab. And I really hope that we hear from you all soon, and hear kind of what's emerged from utilizing this tool. Have a great day.